Today we're discussing how genes influence cells, and we're doing this so we can understand how a cell is structured. And our success criteria is being able to describe how the genes themselves function. So we've all heard of DNA before. What DNA is it's a molecule that contains instructions for how to build proteins within our bodies. Oftentimes DNA gets described as the blueprint for the human body, which is true, but it's also a little bit misleading because what it doesn't actually build the individual parts of your body itself. It builds chemicals that through their interactions and communication cause the cells within the body to develop. Each DNA molecule is made of short sequences called genes. And what a gene is it codes for a specific protein within the body. Now, those proteins keep our bodies functioning normally, but if the DNA changes, then the protein changes. So we can actually track some types of genetic illnesses through the DNA. And we do that through a process known as gene sequencing. And what gene sequencing does is it takes the base chemicals used to make DNA and tracks their pattern. And this is actually easily done, even if it's tedious, because there's only 4 base chemicals that our DNA uses: adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine, A, C, G, and T. And because all life on Earth uses those 4 same base sequences to make DNA, we know that all life has a common origin because we all use the same common system. So if DNA controls our body, different types of changes to the DNA can potentially cause illness. Not all mutations do, but one of the most common ones is cancer. A cancerous cell occurs when certain genes within the body get damaged. Recent research suggests that it can be anywhere between 1 and 10 different genes malfunctioning. And the important thing to remember about cancer is not a single disease. It's actually hundreds and hundreds of diseases that behave in a similar manner. So we classify them all under the same big umbrella. Typically, a cancer occurs when you have damage to the genes that control a cell's ability to divide, a cell's ability to proofread its own DNA and detect other damage, and potentially a cell's ability to self-terminate if the DNA does become damaged. Those mutations together mean that the cell can't detect that it's sick, and it begins growing out of control. It will just keep dividing and dividing and dividing, and that's not how cells normally behave. Cells normally only divide at very specific times, and they actually communicate with each other to make sure they don't force each other out. But when they divide and grow uncontrollably, they create a cellular mass that we call a tumor. And we have been able to identify some of the very common cancer-causing genes. Like P53 is a particular gene that's involved with the body's ability to self-regulate and determine if DNA is being replicated correctly. And if P53 gets damaged, then cells can't do that. And it's a very common gene to see mutated in different types of cancer. So we can see that DNA is really important to life, but then there's some things that we're not actually sure if they're living or not. The scientists continue to debate if they're living or not. And the reason that this is important is because they're made of DNA and proteins. So an example of this would be a virus. Viruses contain DNA within a protein coat. But viruses don't have cells. They are actually much simpler than our cells. They're literally just made up of DNA and the shell that surrounds it. They can move into cells and take cells over and make cells create more viruses, but they're so simple that there are some biologists who say a virus is not alive because it's too simple and it can't reproduce independently of another cell. There's also another, actually very dangerous type of disease known as a prion. A prion causes mad cow disease, for example. And what a prion is, though, is it's not a cell, it's a protein that has the ability to make other proteins like it. It can change the shape of other proteins. And it's very, very harmful to the body. It also can't exist and it can't reproduce independently of a host. And unlike a parasite, it doesn't have the cellular structures it needs to be classified as alive. And scientists are much, much more certain that prions are not alive. There's a much bigger, or it's much more unanimous that a prion is not a living thing. It's just a chemical that's able to alter other chemicals, but it can cause a huge amount of damage to the body. And the most bizarre thing is that it's made of things that are fundamental to life. But prions definitely aren't alive. And most scientists say that viruses aren't alive either.